Biggest thing here is I started my career actually working right here in the city of Miramar. I started working at Target out west, west of 75 in Miramar. And at the time it was brand new. Like it was the premier spot to be in Miramar. I started off as a cashier there. And so really got the typical experience of a high school student learning the skills and values of fiscal responsibility. After that, I started working at the City Hall of Hollywood, the Boys and Girls Club of Broward County, where I got exposed to youth and really understanding the importance and impact of tutoring. Afterwards, I kind of was thinking to myself, do I want to join the private sector? I started working at Kraft Foods, very quickly realized that the bottom line with numbers was not something that motivated me. So went back into government work. I worked at North Springs Improvement District as a permit specialist. And then after some time, I really wanted to have a larger impact at the statewide or nationwide level. And so I got an internship. I left Florida for a few years. I went to New York. I worked at the Clinton Foundation. You can see a picture on the screen. I got to meet President Clinton, as well as other family members from the Clintons, and really got exposed to, again, going back to the education I had from FAU, the disparities in education and how that seems to be the main factor to unlock opportunity. And so I knew then that I wanted to have a direct impact in education. And so for the past 10 years, I've been working in education. I started off at Achievement First, where I uncovered a gap in uncovering data to see that there was a lack of minority teachers and school leaders. And the data shows that not having someone that looks like you as a classroom leader actually does impact your outcomes and ability to achieve. And so I did a lot of work to increase the number of diverse teacher and school leader hires at Achievement First, and ultimately focused on strategies to make sure that we retained those people. I think one of the biggest things is there's a lot of work being done to increase the diversity of the teacher workforce, but what's then being done once they start to keep them in the classroom and ensure that they're set up for success with the resources and tools and ongoing development to be successful. I do that work now. I do it at EdFuel, which is a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. So rather than just working in one specific region, I now work nationwide. And so whether it's schools in California, Alabama, Texas, Minnesota, or even here in Florida, the work that I do is nationwide. All right, so going on to community. I have experience, like I mentioned before, tutoring. In school, I recognized my passion for math. And so I did a lot of tutoring with algebra, statistics, the things that people usually kind of fare and go away from were the things that I dove into. In addition to that, I was a lead volunteer on the Obama campaign. You can see there's a picture there of me with Michelle Obama. Still probably one of the biggest highlights of my life and experience so far, being in the same room with our former FLOTUS. I was literally at a loss for words. She was like, "Hello, nice to meet you." And I just stood there, stargazed, and had to eventually get myself the nerve to say like, "Hi, it's so nice to meet you." In addition to that, again, being passionate about my community, some of my friends laughed, but I definitely joined the Homeowners Association in my community, probably the youngest one on the board. But again, recognizing the ability to use my voice and gather and organize with people to make a change. And so one of the biggest things that I did was I wanted to increase the amount of touch points that neighbors have with neighbors. So we created an annual new barbecue, and almost 50% of the community participated in that annual barbecue, and it's still going on to this day. Not today because of COVID-19, we might try and do like a virtual get together, but it definitely was the first step to ensuring that the community became more engaged with one another. I also was a founding board member of a voter registration organization called 16 Plus Vote. Our biggest goal is to ensure that people as young as 16 understand the importance of voting and register as early as 16 so that by the time they turn 18, they're getting their voter card in the mail and they're ready to go. I'm actually really excited because the first set of 16-year-olds that we had register were about 2 years ago. And so this presidential election coming up, and even the primaries, depending on their birthday, will be the first time that they're able to vote. And some of them have even reached out and said, "I'm so excited." The last thing about my community involvement is related to the City of Miramar Education Advisory Board. I was vice chair up until recently, and as vice chair, I led the efforts to essentially raised thousands of scholarship dollars for students throughout the city of Miramar. And so whether it was asking local businesses, asking other educators located throughout the city, or even people that I've worked with nationwide, I raised thousands of dollars, almost $10,000 to date, for local students throughout the city of Miramar so that they too could have access to going to and through college with financial assistance. And I think that's, you guys have been hearing me talk about education. It's definitely something that's near and dear to my heart, and something that in the next couple of slides, you'll see is a big priority for what I want to bring to the city of Miramar. So I'm sure you've either been thinking about it or, you do want to ask, but why now? Like, of the 25 years that I've been here, working and volunteering throughout the community, why are you interested in running for the city commission now? And I think one of the biggest things to start with my response is that I'm a third generation Miramarian. And so what that means is that I've actually witnessed the city grow as I've grown and as I've built my career and my experience in the community. I think one of the biggest things is really wanting to be part of setting the foundation for the future of Miramar so that, when my younger sister graduates college and she wants to move to this city, she's able to, because the resources and the structures are there to ensure that she can afford to actually live in the city of Miramar, but that also that we're having a sustainable future. I think the other thing is making sure that our leadership is transparent. So oftentimes we see things that are happening throughout the city and we're only seeing it years after the decision was actually made to expand on something or see something change. And then the last thing is just building the capacity of residents. So sometimes there are different policies and procedures that are like a band-aid solution to the root cause of something that's causing some challenges for residents. Actually unpacking that and understanding are additional resources needed to ensure that every resident can thrive here in the city of Miramar. So I'll quickly go over some priorities, but like I said, I do want to make sure this is interactive, so there will be time and space for you all to ask me questions as well. My first priority would be to provide more scholarships to students. I think, when you look at the grading of our schools throughout the city of Miramar, we definitely have some really strong performers. There are a couple inequities, but I think one of the biggest things to ensuring that we have a viable future is to ensure that students can actually afford to go to college and technical school. So the work that I started doing with the Education Advisory Board, continuing with it and making sure we expand access to scholarships for students. The other one would be to reimagine public safety, ensuring that we're allocating resources not just to the police department, the fire department, and all the other emergency services, but reallocating some of that funding to ensure that social emotional health for our community is a focus and a priority. I think the other thing is also ensuring things like implicit bias training, diversity, equity, and inclusion training is something that is brought into things like the police department. So the few bad apples don't actually ruin the reputation of the police department throughout the city, and especially with their interactions with minorities, younger generations, and even seniors, which we've seen throughout the country, has also had an impact. The next thing would be to create priority access to jobs for city residents. If you've heard any of our city leaders speak recently, they tout a lot about how many Fortune 500 companies are actually here in the city of Miramar. But how many of our residents are actually getting access to those top dollar jobs here in the city? So I want to focus on meeting with those companies, doing some data analysis, again, going back to my data geekiness and obsession with math, but doing some data analysis to see like how many of our own residents are actually working at the companies that are headquartered here in the city of Miramar. The next one would be to foster inclusive practices citywide. And one of my biggest ideas there, we often have tons of cultural celebrations on a month-to-month basis, depending on what Heritage Month it is. But let's actually create some multicultural events so that we're actually bringing all the diverse communities together to appreciate one another and understand the differences to make our city much more inclusive as a whole. The last one would be to ensure long-term sustainability. Whether you're a current homeowner or you're a future homeowner in the city of Miramar, making sure that our housing is affordable, that we actually are a city that someone can live in, not just paycheck to paycheck, but they can thrive while living in the city of Miramar. And I think the other piece of sustainability also has to do with environmental impact, making sure that we are offering more incentives for businesses and residents to invest in solar energy and other green initiatives. I think ultimately, I believe that these 5 pillars are essential to setting a solid foundation to what I mentioned at the very beginning of this call, the future of Miramar. So not just for the current generation, but also future generations, to ensure that our city is setting itself up for success, to be a pioneer, to be an innovator, so that other cities throughout the state of Florida, but even nationwide, look to us as a true pioneer and leader in making sure that cities are inclusive, safe, foster a path towards success for the youth, and sustainable over the long term. So with that being said, I'd love to offer you all to please sign up to volunteer and donate. I'll leave this on the screen here. Text Kerri to 31996, and I'll ask you for a series of questions. But I'd also love to kind of take the mic from my mouth for a little bit and open up the floor for you all to ask any questions or just share additional ideas to continue to improve the city of Miramar.
Yeah, I actually have a question.
Yeah, sure. Say your name and then go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, so my name is Dante. Obviously, you have a robust educational background and working in those fields. I just want to know, besides the scholarships, what else can you provide to the students of Miramar going forward as you want to grow in the educational sector?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I think in my work, what I've been doing, and I mentioned this earlier, not just about focused on increasing the diversity of the education workforce, but ensuring that they have the tools and resources to stay in education. And so one of my biggest things, although it's not directly what students like the scholarship priority, it's actually working with the educators in the classroom. And so how can we foster a relationship amongst all the schools in the city of Miramar so that they can come together and convene and discuss the challenges that they're having? So whether you're in historic Miramar or all the way west near Everglades, you are understanding the unique challenges that are being posed to teachers, students, families, and guardians, and actually coming up with really creative solutions that not just impact that one school that's facing it, but you're also making sure that other school leaders are privy to it so that they can either help provide resources, share how they overcame those same challenges, or just learn and see the blueprint so that if and when they face the same challenge, they're not reinventing the wheel and unnecessarily using resources when someone's already figured it out kind of down the street, so to speak. Thank you, great question. Anyone else? I see you, Courtney, Angie, Ali. Hi, Daniela.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
You said that one of your goals is the transparency in the local government. One of the things that happened recently with the COVID-19 outbreak that I think got a lot of residents kind of up in arms was Miramar being one of the first cities announcing, due to the downturn in income, we're going to be furloughing city employees. And it was a huge announcement, which I think was made too fast without saying this is a possibility. It was said this is going to happen, and there was such a huge outrage to it that they all of a sudden backtracked and said, oh, we don't have to anymore. We found the way to work it into the budget. And I was part of the budget call yesterday, and I think that's how we got in touch. With the transparency in government, that's something I'd like to avoid because, we put our trust into the local government, into the first responders, into the staff members for the city. And so I feel like they deserve a level of protection in their employment and income. I thought the situation was just handled poorly, and you're wanting to do the transparency in government. What steps do you think you would take or you would want to implement to make that happen?
Yeah, that's another great question. And I agree. I felt very upset that that was even a proposal that was on the table. I think one of the biggest things that I would change with that process was there was no community involvement, right? No one asked for a town hall. And even without the community and the residents, but even the exact workers who are at the city, when you speak to some of the workers who were out there protesting, who learned about it hours before it was something that was going to show up to the commission, they had no idea as well. And so how do we foster lines of communication between city leaders, city workers, and residents so that we can discuss some of the things that are coming up, regardless of whether or not the solution is to furlough or decrease pay by a certain percentage. I think one of the most important things is to ensure that people have a seat at the table before such drastic decisions are made. And so, I mean, Laureen's on the call, who's a great neighbor of mine who I spoke to about this, but how are you looking at all of the other small expenditures in the budget to ensure that they're actually necessary? How are you making sure that you have contingency plans so that whether it's COVID-19 or a hurricane disaster or another pandemic that we just don't even know about yet, what's the contingency plan to ensure that there's buffer in the budget so that if and when something like this comes up, the first reaction isn't to furlough employees and risk not just the safety of our community, but also the viability of our government staying in place and actually there to support us? I hope that answers your question. I think ultimately the big takeaway, more engagement between residents and making sure that people, especially those historically underserved communities that are often forgotten about, have a seat at the table before those huge sweeping decisions are made. Any other questions or comments?
If nobody else has a question, you're running for a seat that I don't believe is vacated. What do you feel you're going to bring to the table that might be different and new?
I think it really boils down to just a fresh perspective. The incumbent who's in the seat now has been there for almost a decade. And I think the ability to have a pulse to the ever-changing environment and community and needs of our community is something that, you know, unfortunately sometimes falls to the wayside depending on who's in the seat. And so having such a passion for the community, not just looking for just the commission seat, but having been involved for many years at various different ways, whether it's with the youth, whether it's on the education advisory board, with local campaigns. I think for me, just coming in with a new sense of vigor, a new lens of increasing that transparency, making sure that more people have a seat at the table and creating a voice for people versus just going to a meeting and voting on something with very limited knowledge on what it is that people desire and what's the best decision for the community versus the best decision that I just think should be decided on. I see you talking, Laureen, but I don't think you're off mute. There you go.
I'm on. You know, old lady have to learn this technology.
Oh, you're not old. You're young.
Oh, I'm so proud of y'all young people. The young lady at Angie, you were asking, I've been in Miramar 27, 28, 29 years. So I've seen Miramar turn over. I've been here. I've seen the political whole package do a turnover. And it is time. This time is time for you all. It is time. This is the time. It is time for you all to get behind. We have a young person here, Kerri, who wants to put her head out there. And it is time for us to support her. The ages, I was there when Messerman first started, when he first started his walk in our neighborhood. And we had a house, one of the basketball coaches, and we met there. And we asked him what was it that he was going to bring to the table for us back then. And he fulfilled. But as anything, as time goes along, time brings on changes. And it is time for another change. That was good for me 20 some years ago, but now it's time for another change. It's time. And if you notice the the environment and the transitioning of Miramar, the old Miramar, which always gets left out. It got left out back during my time. It continues to get left out. And that is a bulk of our votes, where those people do vote. They have homes and they get left out. So we have to make sure that we bring in the old Miramar, the middle Miramar, and the west Miramar. It's a combination, and it takes work. I did a lot of canvassing for many of the different political people through Miramar, and for President Obama, and for our different seats, because we forget about the little, like the one coming up in August. You can count. If you watch the polls, you will find that the numbers are going to be so low because no one is really pushing it. We're pushing it now this year because it's a political year for a presidential election. But on the years that we don't have a presidential election and we have these type of elections, your local, you find that the numbers are extremely low. And that is where we have to and be supported and emphasize, because it's the everyday people like you all and me that end up making the noise for those people that represent us. And if we don't make the noise, they're not going to represent us the way we need for them to represent. And as you see what's going on in our government right now. So yes, that's all I'm going to say, because I'm a retired speech therapist, so I can keep y'all ears forever.
Thank you, Mrs. Clark. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, and Angie, another lens of just like having context. Like I remember when Miramar, and I was obviously a very young girl, but I remember hearing my mom and my grandmother talking about how they were expanding the city so quickly, and traffic was, you know, getting really bad. And, you know, once they started to like deforest and like I was the first graduating class from New Renaissance. I remember when that street wasn't even a street. It was just all trees, right? And
Right.
so like,
what trees and
yeah.
pasture.
And, you know, I remember like some neighbors being like, I have all these rodents now because they have nowhere to go. And so like just really thinking through, as we grow, what are the inevitable ripple effects that are going to continue? So as we get further west, and then, you know, our city becomes way more like far east is really, really far east compared to everyone who's west. How are we making sure that all the decisions are not just for one zip code or one subset of the city, but it's a holistic view of what is the viability of the future of Miramar from 441 all the way to the Everglades, and how are we making sure that nobody gets left behind as we grow and as we seek to become a better city, making sure every region of the city is folded into becoming better.
One of the major things also, Kerri-Ann, you're going to be looking at is that if you are familiar with Miami Gardens is a rollover into Miramar. And Miami Garden has, their commissioners have, well, one of the commissioners has left and he's running for something else. But he left there almost with a growth of new housing, of apartments. There are going to be 6 buildings. They've already started with 3 off University by the Walmart. Each one of those housing buildings hold 150 apartments. We have 3 of them already. So if each is 150 and it's 3 and they're planning on making 6, you think about 4 people in an apartment. What is the numbers like and what is going to roll over? So you're going to have a rolling effect from Miami Gardens, which is Dade County, into Miramar, which is Broward, because we're right on the line. And most of all, many of the parents, I know for a fact, because I worked in Liberty City, many of my parents would further drive this way into the Sam's, when you had the shopping center, I would meet my parents there. They would prefer to come this way as opposed to Aventura, because it's a straight shot for them. as well. So you're going to look at the numbers that are going to roll into Miramar, not just Miramar itself.
Right. Yeah. And it's just like I was saying, a ripple effect. Like as the population continues to increase, the impact on our environment is going to increase, the impact on traffic is going to increase, and getting ahead of those things so that when they start to occur, it's not this reaction of, oh, we've got to reach out to Broward County to see if they can change the timing of the traffic lights. No, we know these things are coming. What are we doing to lay the groundwork so that we're being super proactive about it versus waiting for, unfortunately, things like accidents to happen? Like I remember near City Hall, I got into an accident there. And one of my biggest things to the police officer is, why isn't there a traffic stop here? And he's like, oftentimes there has to be statistics to show that there needs to be a traffic light. And I'm like, statistics as in what? And he looked at me and he was like, statistics like you just had an accident here. And so we have to get to a cap before it's then proven that it's needed. And I'm just like, it just shouldn't be that way. Like if we know more people are going to be driving this way because you've built this awesome, huge road, we should proactively have a stoplight here or a stop sign or whatever the case is to just mediate the flow of traffic and get ahead of things like that. So it's a really valid point.
Yeah, I live on the back of Douglas, so I know that whole process with the trafficking when they had to bring in the sewage on Miramar Boulevard, how we had to have everything dug up and connection. So it really affects everyone more than, because if you're going to school, if you're going to work, those are the things that will be affect. And now that Miramar is, what is that, on Flamingo and Miramar Parkway, we have what, about close to 7 buildings, housing, new housing.
And the new plaza that is coming right in the center of all of them.
And I understand we building for revenue, but revenue, as you know, revenue means what? More roads, more everything, and more taxes.
Yes, unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah, all of it. And I think the other thing too, yes, getting the word out about my priorities and voting for me is vital, but ultimately just getting the word out so that people understand your local officials are in charge of these things. And so federal level elections, statewide elections, they're very important, but oftentimes the thing that actually impacts your day to day is the local level election. And I think a lot of us, especially in my generation, often overlook it. You can look at the voting numbers. To your point, people are voting because it's a presidential election year. My election is next year. It's in March. And so the get out the vote has to come strong, and it has to come heavy for people to actually leave their house in the beginning of March to come out and vote. And when you look at the numbers to see how many residents are actually electing these local leaders, you'll be blown away. Like there are roughly 90,000 people in the city of Miramar who are eligible to vote. The last election for mayor and commissioner, less than 8,000 people came out to vote, meaning less than 10%, less than 10% of people in the city of Miramar actually engaged in that local election, which means incumbents just kind of get reelected and it's status quo, and they do amazing things. I'm not knocking anyone, but if you engage, listen to the priorities and ask those hard-hitting questions to understand what are you going to do to make sure my day-to-day is actually enjoyable so that I can succeed, so that I can thrive while living here and not just exist. They often don't have answers because they're not being pushed, because 3,000 people are voting them in versus the 90,000 who are eligible to participate in our local elections.
I just think that people, especially our generation, I mean, I'm just finding out now, we don't realize how much the local government really affects us. We complain a lot about, Washington, the people out of Washington, but a lot of the stuff we're complaining about, it can be fixed in our local government. So I didn't realize that for a while. I was complaining. I'm like, oh, wow. And then I realized people were saying you got to vote locally. If you don't vote locally, nothing's going to be fixed. So that's a big part of the problem. And I'm just like, I'm glad I'm glad I figured out later than never. So that's just, a big point that you made, that, a lot of people aren't getting out and voting. So, this is our time to, lead people to the polls and march to let them know that, hey, you can cry all you want, you can complain all you want, but until you get out and vote, nothing's really going to change.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people in our generation, Courtney, were and continue to be rallied up about everything that's been going on in our country with the racial disparities, right? So we participated in the protest right at Anson a few weeks ago. If every single young person who was in that protest understood that you should translate your anger, translate your disappointment, your dismay into actually voting to make the changes that are needed, like reimagining public safety that I mentioned earlier, that's what's actually going to move the needle forward so that we prevent something like this from happening right here in our community.
I agree. You got to keep the same energy we kept when we were out there on the streets and take it right to the polls.
Yeah. And it's hard to make that connection, right? Because if you're not politically engaged, you can just be like, my vote doesn't matter. And I've heard that a lot.
Yeah.
I've heard that a lot. Not just from young people.
No. It matters.
Exactly.
It matters. Like every vote matters.
Yeah.
Considering what's going on right now, like vote, just vote. That's all.
Yeah.
Voting now, it's harder now because our current situation, but just whatever means necessary, vote.
Yep, 100%. Ali, I see that you've been listening very intently. Any comments or questions?
No comments, just observing and pretty much agree what you've been saying so far, so very pleased.
Thank you. I'm glad that you joined us today.
Sorry about, guess in the other door. Right. Okay.
You might end up hearing my dog very soon too. And then Ali Sylvester, any comments or questions from you? And anyone else who's on the call who's not on video? I'm just calling out names because I see faces.
No questions. No questions.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us.
No problem.
What are your next steps?
Get the word out. We're in a very unique place. So I will say, like, I've been posting on social media, engaging with as many people as possible. And the question that I've gotten from like 3 people is, how come I don't see your name on my sample ballot for August 18th? And I'm like, the election is March 9th, guys, please. So I think it's really focusing on bolstering the number of volunteers that we have, because I think without the man, woman, they power, it will be impossible to get the word out, right? And so right now it's like asking people to text Kerri to 31996 so that we can get your information. And then you can also answer some questions about how you'd like to engage. And then the other thing is to begin canvassing as safely as possible, so that, you know, having volunteers wear t-shirts so that it's very obvious that you're out volunteering, wearing masks, wearing gloves, and attaching, you know, different giveaways so that people can know that we're also ensuring the safety of them as community members. So I think spread the word if you're on this call about my candidacy. I'm happy to talk to anyone, even if it's one-on-one. I'd love to have you pressure test my ideas, give me your own ideas for how to create and bolster change in our community. But right now, asking for donations and asking for people to sign up to volunteer are the huge next steps.
Gotcha. Question.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, I know you mentioned you said you're an education advisory board. As a resident on the east side of Miramar, I have kids who are into robotics, science. But one thing I noticed, a lot of the programs are more out west. Like everything is Vizcaya, everything is all the way here. So I want to know, we have the Vernon Hargrave Center. It's like everything is more focused on sports. When we have children here that they don't have the programs like the musical arts or the STEM programs. I mean, everything is geared towards out west, the sky. And a lot of, parents can't take their kids all the way here. So it's kind of like, why can't we have, I understand, it's have an equal balance between both sides.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I want to see on the historic side of Miramar is some kind of programs, because my kids, I have a child who's a honor student. It's in the STEM engineering program at Apollo Middle School down the street from me. But every time there's a program, I have to take her way outside, somewhere else in my neighborhood, and that's why, I feel like a lot of, especially on the East Coast, I'm not the East Coast, sorry, on the East historic Miramar, a lot of the schools here are very average.
Yeah.
And it's like if those resources were brought here, that would probably pick up the grades academically around it. Also keep the kids active and something that they like besides putting all the money into sports and all this. I understand it keeps them busy, but we need to have some of these programs that are out west over here on the east.
Yeah. I hear you. I think one of the things that we saw on the Education Advisory Board is that disparity. So even when you look at the grades that schools get, as you go west, those grades get higher and higher. And so then you ask yourself, like, okay, what's the root cause for that? And then if you speak to some of the school leaders, they'll say, well, our number one issue here on the east side is parent involvement. And so then you're like, okay, but you can't blame parents. No parent wants to see their child fail. So let's unpack that a little bit more. What does this really mean? And some of the root causes that I've seen in my work and also with analyzing the data here in Miramar is the types of jobs, right, that people have, and the flexibility that you have depending on the type of job that you have. And then the other thing is the resource allocation with city funds. And so we are focusing on the historic side of Miramar with beautifying it. So you're going to see over these next few years, they're going to be adding bike lanes. They're going to be working on the median. And they've started some of that work right there near, I think like 67th, 69th, around that area. But my biggest push is, other than the beautification, what's the plan to ensure that there are community events, community resources for students, going back to even the scholarship thing that I mentioned, but actually having resources where there can be extracurricular. And one of my biggest ideas is the City of Miramar Education Advisory Board meets at the old City Hall building that's right around the curve. There's so much space in there to house programs. Like, it's huge in there. There's a banquet hall that people can rent out that a lot of people don't even know about. It's beautiful. Why aren't we actually utilizing that space to create those same exact programs that are out west when we do have the infrastructure to house them on the historic and east side of the city?
Exactly, because I've been living here for 12 years, and I could see that the demographics are changing. Even the home values here have doubled almost nearly.
Yeah, do not sell if you have property.
So if you have young folks who are, early 30s, 20s, who want to buy a home here, that's, still affordable. They're going to want, especially the price that you're asking for, they're going to want resources on their side of town.
Exactly.
You don't want to be like me. I'm traveling all the way to Miami Lakes to drop my kids off to school because of a program.
Right.
The resource that they have. And my child, who's just in middle school, I searched the area. No, she's going to Apollo Middle School. And I grew up in a neighborhood where we all played together, went to elementary school, middle school, high school together. Now it's like, okay, your kid got to go here, you got to go there.
Yep.
It's no family involvement. I mean, it's just, I want to see the resources come here. I mean, I see politicians come and they promise things and they say, we're going to do this, historic Miramar, this, that. All I see is flowers popping up on every corner and palm trees.
And they're beautifying it, right? So that when you're driving,
beautification is great,
right?
And he is. Yes, Ali, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. That city hall, that the old city hall that they have, that can be utilized for a lot of things. And I'm going to give you an example. My son, the one who's down there, he did a lot of volunteer service there with the senior citizens for the high school. Then it came around that they didn't utilize it the way they should have. So we had to go, and it's a shame, like you said, you have to go out of your neighborhood. We had to wind up going to Pembroke Pines to be able to do the volunteer service with senior citizens because of certain localities, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
So when we have, and now trust me, I did go to the city hall, and that's when we have to have, I call it hot peppers. We have to have hot peppers in the seat to represent us. We do put people in, and once they get in, you hear me, Kerri-Ann? Once they get in, they get a little not peppery anymore.
Yeah.
They pan out.
Yeah.
And so,
go ahead. Sorry, I apologize.
yes, that's okay. But that is one of the things. And you're right. We have to, and I had to go out of the neighborhood. And we should not have to go out the neighborhood when we board in the neighborhood. So, and it's a lot for you in the evening time, going here, there, and everywhere.
Yep, exactly.
So that, Kerri-Ann, that is one of the things that would be, being that you're, would probably be one of the younger ones.
Yeah.
And that is one of the major things, because the neighborhood cannot, it's just like churches. Churches cannot, neighborhoods cannot continue to live if we don't bring in youthful families, young families with young children. I'm retired, my husband retired, my kids are in their 20s. You know, we need young families to keep Miramar going, and young minds like yours.
And it has, in order for that to occur, it has to be accessible, right? So going back to me being a third generation Miramarian, at the rate that we're going, no more generations will be able to buy into this city, especially when you think about younger families who recently graduated, have just started their career. They need to be able to afford to come back home or move to Miramar from other regions and be successful, and not just look to West Miramar as a place to go because all the resources are there. But what are the incentives citywide, regardless again of the zip code that you're in the city, you will have access to? And like we've been talking about, there's infrastructure to house these things. And so there shouldn't be this enormous barrier for it to exist. You know, they say it's right here in Miramar, but there shouldn't be this barrier for it to exist relatively close to where you are located in Miramar.
Okay, so thank God for internet. We didn't have that during my time.
Yeah, no, seriously.
So you can expand the news much quicker now.
Exactly. I've been kind of baffling my brain with how I can get the word out about my candidacy. And really, I think Angie, I don't know if she's still on the call, she asked this question earlier, but really making sure that this is the blueprint for how city leaders engage with residents, right? Like, not everyone's gonna have the time to go to a commission meeting in person and sit for 3 hours and wait for open forum to then ask questions, right? How do you meet the people where they are, regardless of a pandemic or not? Things like this should have been occurring regularly to gauge what it is that city residents and even visitors need to see from the city in order to feel successful. It shouldn't just be when it's, you know, their re-election time and they're coming around and they're like, hey, remember I did this, remember I did that. It's like, no, you need to tell me what your plan is moving forward so that I can ensure that I can see your vision and it aligns with what it is that I need out of the city to be successful and thrive as a resident. All right. Any other questions? I know there's a few people on the line who aren't on video.
No, I would like to see you canvas the east historic side more. I think when I volunteered for a campaign before for a candidate, most thing I heard from the residents is like, oh, we hear it's the same thing over and over again. everyone on the historic side feels like neglected. It's like, oh, okay, we're gonna hear the same thing over and over again, but our roads, everything's gonna be the same. Nothing has changed.
Yeah.
The only thing is changing pretty much is just it's the older folks that I lived in my neighborhood, they're moving. So the older people, the newer people, or younger people are coming in.
Yeah.
And they kind of revitalize the neighborhood, and the houses are, just they look nice now. I mean, they were updated.
Beautified.
So, yeah, the younger folks are coming in the community now. We just want to hear, I know it's very hard with COVID, so we have Miramar Park Home Association. We have Tropical Homes on this side. So, anything you can do to, come by, or even, I mean, it's a COVID, sorry, we can't really, I want to meet you, but, if you could come by, just canvas, knock on doors,
Of course, that's definitely part of the plan. Once these primaries are done, so people don't confuse it with, how come you're not on the ballot? Once after August 18th, I will be out there. You'll probably be tired of seeing me. We'll be knocking on doors with our gloves and our masks, keeping 6 feet apart to remain safe. But that is my priority. I think making sure that I hear directly from people in the most historic part of our city, the part that existed from its inception, right? Like, and making sure that your voices are heard, not just because I'm seeking election, but because it matters. And because in order for our city to be inclusive, all voices need to be heard, not just those that are louder or have, larger pocketbooks.
Okay.
Stephanie, I think you had a question.
I did. As a fellow Miramarian, the most important thing to me always is the city's budget. And I appreciated what you spoke about earlier about transparency and what that's going to mean for people who are living in the city of Miramar. And I can see that you're going to be continuously having these kind of Zoom meetings where it's going to be interactive even when you're elected and in office.
Yes.
Let's claim so it. I would claim, girl. So I look forward to having transparency, even when it's a year later, or a month later, or 2 months later. You have these same kind of interactive calls, and you can share information that won't be detrimental to revealing, but will be a transparency between the residents and what people on the board. That's really important.
Yeah, thank you. I think I've been doing some listening tours with community members, and one of the biggest things I hear is like, where does our budget go? Like, I want to see the allocation of like, how much is going to this department, how much is going here. If you try and find that information, you're often going to be told that you have to look online, and then you get lost on the website, or you have to put in public records requests, but all of that information is public record. And so one of my ideas to increase budget transparency is to simply come up with a website that's updated at least once a month to see the current expenditures, the revenue that's coming in, and what's that difference, and what's the trajectory and projection for the next few months in the fiscal year. And I think that those, again, are very small and quick solutions that don't take a ton of manpower or woman power to actually have happen. It just takes someone having that vigor and that determination to make it happen, to see it from start to finish, so that it actually does get done.
Good. Looking forward to that, because it's really hard to use the website for Miramar.
Awesome. We've got just a few minutes. Any other folks want to chime in, ask any questions, or share ideas?
Okay, life in COVID-19. If we are not comfortable canvassing for protection, keeping our families healthy and safe, in addition to texting and the donations, what are some things that can remotely be done to support?
Yeah, absolutely. What we're also going to start is phone banking. And so calling residents, especially those that even if we do go canvassing, they just don't want to open their door, which makes perfect sense. But we'll come up with, I'm hoping, Elisha, am I saying it right? Ms. Clark told me that you have a ton of
Yes, ma'am.
experience with data. So putting together lists so that we have contact information of residents who've said it's okay to have their information, and making phone calls, asking them the same questions that we've been talking about on this call. What's important to you? What needs to change for you to feel like you can thrive here in the city of Miramar? And then the other thing, which will probably come in a few weeks, but texting. Sending text to folks, especially when we're trying to hit the younger generation. They probably are not going to answer the phone. They're going to respond via text, and just asking them the same thing. Like, have you heard about Kerri-Ann? If you haven't, go to her website. Also, she's willing to hop on the phone with you to talk for 10 to 15 minutes to learn more, and setting those things up. So if you text the number and provide your information, I'll be sure to aggregate it along with my campaign manager, and we'll be reaching out to everyone to just say, like, confirming, are you interested in volunteering? If so, how? And then making note of that information so that we kind of disperse things for you to do in a way that you feel confident and safe doing them. All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much. This is my first virtual event, and I'm so glad that you guys attended. There will be a lot more. Again, if you haven't, please, please, please text Kerri to 31996. And I'm just excited to keep the momentum going. Spread the word with your family and friends. If you want to have a one-on-one, just indicate all of that when you do text the information. I'm more than happy to chat with you to talk about strategy or just hear your ideas. And I think the biggest thing is, I don't want this to be Kerri-Ann's campaign. It should be our campaign, because this is our city. I'm just going to be someone who kind of takes your ideas and makes them actually occur by being a commissioner. But this is our city, our campaign, and really and truly our future, and the viability of making sure that the city of Miramar continues to be strong, diverse, and of course, inclusive. All right. Thank you all so much. Nice to meet you all. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.